Hello everyone and welcome to week 3 of English 200. This week we're going to talk about child labor in the United States and Jack London's short story called The Apostate. We're also going to begin to talk about the research project you'll be doing over the course of the semester. Your readings for this week include: please read The Apostate from the Portable Jack London Reader. It's found on pages 118 to 135. And please also read The Bedford Researcher, Chapter 2, Exploring and Focusing. There's also a small part of Chapter 3 that you'll be advised to read during your research module this week. Your assignments include your research journal number 1, where you'll be doing some free writing in order to find a topic to write your research project about. Discussion number 3, where we'll talk about The Apostate by answering questions with research. Your first post will be due on Thursday at 11:59 p.m. That's your own post. And then you'll need to respond to at least 3 of your peers' posts by 11:59 p.m. And also not listed here, but also due is your third research module, and I'll be talking about that later in the lecture. You'll be completing the module and taking the quiz by Thursday at 11:59 p.m. So let's begin by talking a little bit about Jack London's short story, The Apostate. The Apostate was originally written by Jack London fairly quickly, in 8 days. He wrote it for a specially themed issue of Cosmopolitan magazine that was published in 1906. He earned $700 for writing it, which is a lot of money for a short story in that day. And Jack London at this point was already a pretty established writer. But he had rarely written about child labor and the experience he had working in a factory. So he worked in the Pacific Jute Mill factory from 1893 to 1894. Shortly after that, Jack London left the working life to become a tramp. He went across the country with, first he went tramping on his own through Reno. He jumped on a train and followed it for a few weeks to Reno and was on the road for a few weeks. And he wrote a diary about his experiences. But then after he came back and took a job shoveling coal for an electric plant, and after several months of that hard labor, decided to leave hard labor forever. And he joined a national movement of workers who crossed the country who went tramping across the country as a large group called Kelly's Army. And they went from the West Coast all the way to Washington, D.C. to be part of a big march that was asking for better working conditions for people working in labor, such as Jack London was working. So this story comes from a lot of experience, and it also comes from a political platform that Jack London is writing about, and it's important to think about that when we're reading the story. Another thing to think about is the history of child labor in America. These are selections from a book called Child Labor Laws and Enforcement. Children have been working in America, contributing to the well-being of the family unit since the arrival of the first colonists. European settlers, bringing social values with them that equated idleness with pauperism, were quick to pass laws that actually required children to work. For example, in 1641, the Court of Massachusetts Bay ordered all households to work on wild hemp for clothing, and it was expected that, quote, children should be industriously employed. One, adopting poor laws, similar to the English laws, the colonies required the apprenticeship of poor children, some at ages as young as 3 years. Children worked on family farms and in family cottage industries. The institution of slavery also encompassed the labor of children born or sold into servitude. The Industrial Revolution ushered in the modern factory system and changed a predominantly rural populace into an urban one. Factory towns grew up dependent on a labor supply of women and children, the children working not necessarily as apprentices anymore, but as factory labor. Children were seen as cheap and manageable sources of labor. Newspaper advertisements of the day reflected the fact that factory owners preferred to hire families with several children, and widows with children were especially favored. Child labor in this country was so widespread and so much a part of economic reality in the early part of the 19th century that no one looked toward or expected its abolition. But as the number of factories multiplied and the child workforce grew, the social conscience began to stir, not against child labor itself, but against some features of the factory system as they affected the children. The earliest concerns were that factory children were growing up without receiving even a modest education. Long work days and work weeks left little time for study. In 1813, Connecticut enacted a law encouraging manufacturers to provide young employees with lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic, but the law was ineffective. It was not until 1836 that Massachusetts passed this country's first child labor law. Legislation that required children under the age of 15 employed in manufacturing to spend at least 3 months each year in school. A few states soon adopted similar laws. After the Civil War, industry expanded and became increasingly mechanized. The textile industry flourished in the South, and with it oppressive child labor. Children as young as 6 or 7 years were recruited to work 13-hour days for minuscule wages in hot and dusty factories. Proposals to change these conditions met with stiff opposition. By the turn of the century, only a few southern states had passed laws limiting the number of hours that children could work. The early 1900s saw a growing acceptance of the concept that states should provide for the general protection of children. In 1909, the Bureau of Labor Statistics issued a landmark report on working women and children. This 19-volume report confirmed that more children were employed in the South than in New England. The report also found that, in a substantial number of cases, children's earnings were essential to meeting their families' needs, but that in other cases, families would not have suffered financial hardships if child labor were forbidden. By 1913, all but 9 states had fixed 14 years as the minimum age for factory work, and a majority of the states had extended this minimum to stores and other specified places of employment. Although Congress had made several attempts to restrict oppressive child labor, the attempts had failed, usually on constitutional grounds. It was not until 1938, with the passage of the Fair Labor Standards Act, upheld by the Supreme Court in 1941, that meaningful federal child labor legislation was enacted. So based on this information and your active reading of The Apostate and the information I gave you about Jack London writing The Apostate, I'd like you to consider the following questions. The first step to this discussion forum is I'd like you to choose 3 questions to answer in the discussion. You must use evidence from the text to support your answers. You can also use evidence from outside sources if you'd like. Your post must be at least 500 words, and your post is due by Thursday at 11:59 p.m. Step 2. Once you post your own post, then you'll be able to see the full discussion. That means you'll be able to see your peers' posts that have posted before you. Please respond to at least 3 of your peers' posts with significant posts that extend the conversation. I'd like you to try and think critically about the topic. I'd like you to ask questions and dig deeper into what your peer has said. Each response to your peer's post must be at least 250 words, and all of those are due Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Just a side note, don't forget to begin each post that you put up with a salutation with something like, "Hi class," or if you're just responding to a peer, "Hi Joe," and then close by signing your name. Here are the questions I'd like you to choose from. Remember, you're choosing 3 of these. What does the word apostate mean? Why do you think Jack London named the short story The Apostate? How is Johnny an apostate? What is a jute mill? Describe the working conditions in the jute mill where Johnny worked. Were these conditions normal for the time period? Use examples from the text to support what you write. What does the short verse at the beginning of the story mean? Where does it come from? Why would London include it as part of the story? What were the great events in Johnny's life? And you can refer to page 128 for some of these. Why are these events so meaningful for Johnny? Research the term pie in the sky. Describe Johnny's mother. What is important to her? Do you think she's a good mother or a bad mother? Why? How are Johnny's siblings different from him? In the end of the story, Johnny gives up his life as a worker to become a tramp. What did it mean to become a tramp in the early 1900s? Do you think the conclusion of the story is optimistic or pessimistic? Why? What is the social commentary on the fate of the working class? What social commentary on the fate of the working class is being communicated in this story? Do you think conditions have improved for the working class? Why or why not? And finally, compare this short story to Build a Fire, 1908. How is the protagonist in that story different or similar to Johnny? Did either of the characters escape his fate? How much does the environment in which the characters are living play a role in their survival? All right, that's it for The Apostate. Now we're going to move on to talk about the research project. Throughout the semester, we're going to be working on creating a research project in this class. And you'll have a number of parts of this project that'll be due. They're listed here. We'll begin by creating, this week we're going to be brainstorming topics for your research project. By next week, you're going to create a research topic form. We're going to give us information about the topic and do some preliminary research. By week 6, you're going to create an annotated bibliography, and I'll talk to you a lot about what that means. And by week 9, you're going to create an outline. And by week 10, you're going to develop some body paragraphs. Week 11, we're going to work on writing introductions. Week 12, we're going to work on writing conclusions and creating flow in our paper. In week 13, we're going to draft our first full draft and have conferences to go over how to improve them. In week 14, you'll do a self-review. In week 15, you'll do a peer review. And finally, in week 16, you'll be turning in your final draft. Now, the requirements for your research paper include that it needs to be 8 to 10 pages long, it needs to be in Times New Roman 12-point font, and it needs to be written in MLA format. Your paper must have at least 6 academic sources other than our textbook or any of the texts that we've been studying in this class. And all of those texts must be referred to in MLA in-text citations and cited as part of a works cited page at the end of your paper. Your paper must have an introduction where you introduce your topic, and you have a focused thesis that clearly states the topic you are writing about and the position you are arguing about this topic. Your paper must contain several body paragraphs that introduce subtopics that are proven with evidence. Your paper must have a conclusion where you clearly state how you've proven your thesis and communicate the purpose of your paper. Here's the basic structure. You'll have an introduction that's 2 to 3 paragraphs long. That'll begin with a hook and introduce your topic, frame your argument, and clearly state your thesis. You'll have body paragraphs, 5 to 10 paragraphs that are 2 to 3 paragraphs per subtopic. Each body paragraph should introduce subtopics, support those subtopics with evidence, and relate back to the thesis. Your paper should include counter-arguments that state either in a single paragraph or are integrated into body paragraphs for the arguments against the one that you're making in your paper. And your paper needs to have a conclusion that restates all the main points that you've made in your paper, and that restates the evidence that you've used to prove your points. End by reinforcing your message and sharing your final thoughts on the topic without saying things like, I believe or I feel. Your paper must have a works cited page, as mentioned above, and you're going to need to have a bibliography page. We'll talk more about the difference between those two things and how to do it later in the semester. So the first thing you're doing is you're going to be choosing a topic. And this week, you'll choose a topic, you'll choose several topics, and then you'll do some free writing techniques in order to think about how you could write about that topic, what you could argue about that topic in an 8 to 10 page research paper. So here are some possible topics. You can write about Jack London's biography, like we've learned about in the film that we watched in week 1. You can write about Jack London's writing or his use of naturalism in his writing. You could write about Charmian Kittredge London, a woman we're going to be learning a lot more about in the next few weeks. You can write about the pre- and post-colonial history of one of the islands Charmian and Jack visited on their Snark voyage in 1907, and we'll be talking about that in later weeks as well. But these islands include the Hawaiian Islands, the Marquesian Islands, Tahiti, Bora Bora, Samoa, Fiji, and the Solomon Islands. You could write about the new woman of the early 1900s. You could write about Robert Louis Stevenson, the author, and his time in Samoa. And this is a really great topic for those of you who live in Napa, because there is a Robert Louis Stevenson Museum located in St. Helena. You could write about the topic of prize fighting. Jack London covered many of the most famous prize fights, and including a famous one with Jack Johnson, an incredible African-American prize fighter. You could write about sweatshops and child labor, like what we're talking about today. You could write about the women's suffrage movement or prohibition, or how these two topics are connected. You could write about women in the workplace, especially in the early 1900s. You could write about the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and compare it to a current or recent disaster. You could write about socialism or capitalism. You could write about strikes, unions, and riots, or the Klondike and the Yukon gold rush, as we learned about last week. Or you could write about Kelly's Army or hoboing in the early 1900s. If none of these topics are speaking to you, please immediately contact me via email or stop by my office hours, and I'll give you some ideas on how to find another topic. So let's briefly talk about the academic writing process. It really is it's a continuous process that begins with generating ideas, planning, drafting, and developing your paper, and then revising and editing your paper. There's a lot of different pre-writing techniques. You can brainstorm, where you use free association to stimulate a chain of ideas, often to personalize a topic or break it down. This is a good pre-planning idea. So say you're looking at this list of topics and you're like, okay, I'm going to start thinking about Robert Louis Stevenson, and you're just going to free associate Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island, pirates, and like just start free associating what you know about this topic for like 5 or 10 minutes. And if you follow that chain and realize, oh, wow, I don't really have a lot of interest in this topic, then you can cross that one off and think, okay, I'm not going to do that topic. And you don't waste your time with a 15-minute pre-write about that topic. So it's kind of like pre-work to make sure that, oh, let's see if this is something that really works for me. So once you've chosen 3 different topics, you can do a free writing assignment. And how you do this is you tap into your unconscious by writing continuously without lifting your pen or pencil from the page for a specific amount of time. And for the purpose of our assignment, you'll be doing it for 15 minutes. You begin by writing a sentence at the top of the page. Maybe it's something about why you're interested in the topic of Hawaii, pre and post colonial Hawaii. And you're going to write without stopping for at least 10 minutes. I'm recommending actually 15 minutes. Don't censor yourself while you're writing. Don't cut yourself down. Don't worry about spelling. You're just going to let your mind wander for 15 minutes. If you get stuck, then ask yourself questions like, what interests me about the topic? What do I care most about? What do I know about this topic? What have I read about this topic? Or what have I heard about it? How might I feel about this topic? And then just repeat this process until it really expands into a good idea. If you're a visual person, you can try doodling or sketching as a different approach. You can just get a piece of paper, and you can begin with a key visual at the center of the top of the page, and then add sketches or doodles as they occur to you to embellish, expand, define, or redirect your topic. You'll have to post a photograph of the artwork that you create for this as part of your journal entry as one of the 3 journal entries, 3 15-minute experiences that you're going to do, if this is the one you choose. Or also, if you're a visual person, you could do mind mapping. And that's where you start with a topic or idea in the beginning of in the middle of the page, and then you use sticky notes or cloud software or just circles on a page to write down and arrange your ideas about the topic. Or you could ask reporters questions about the topic, like who, what, where, when, why, how. And I have an example here to the right of how to go about asking those questions. If none of these pre-writing techniques are working for you, there are even more, as you probably already saw when you read Chapter 1 last week, in the Bedford Researcher Chapter 1, pages 20 through 26. So for your research journal this week, please, I'd like you to free write on at least 3 different topics that you found on that list. Please make these free writes serious and use the time to really help yourself find a conversation, an academic conversation that you'd like to join. You'll need to spend at least 15 minutes writing about each topic. Consider the following questions while you're writing. I'm personally interested in prize fighting because, or insert topic. I am academically interested in the new woman because. If you get stuck, use the sentence starters on pages 24 and 25, or use any of the techniques that you see here. Okay? Finally, we're going to be beginning our 3rd module. This is called Explore, Develop, and Focus. Please click through the content and complete the following research. The following read and complete the work for the following sections. Preliminary explorations, reading Bedford Researcher Chapter 2, the exploring and focusing. There's a couple of sections of this chapter that are pointed out to you. And then read a small part of Chapter 3, developing your research question. Then watch the video, Research Writing, Choosing a Topic. Also notice that there's a PDF with the script located below that video in case you want to download it, so you have that available to you to read through. Then read through the page Preliminary Research, the Internet, and the NBC Library. Make sure you read all and watch all these sections carefully and do the work that it asks you to do. Then at the end, you'll see that there's a quiz. You'll only have 2 attempts to take this quiz. And this quiz is due by Thursday at 11:59 p.m. All right, guys, that's it for week 3. Please pay attention to due dates. Hopefully you watch this lecture on Monday as I recommend, so you know what's due this week. Next week, we're going to be reading the story of an eyewitness. This is an essay by Jack London that he wrote after experiencing the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco. And we'll also be looking at other eyewitness accounts in order to better understand this traumatic event. We will also develop our research topic form, so we'll take the next step from our pre-writing. And then we'll also do our online research module, which will be on cultivating research for information needs. Oops. All right, that's it for this week, guys. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And don't forget, I have office hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 11 to 12:30 and from 1:30 to 3.